Hello, my friends. Welcome to another installment of Perspectives on Life with Old Dr. D. We're continuing a series on living in uncertain times and the importance of relationships as we live in these uncertain times. So, in this particular video, I'd like you to really ponder a question. Who makes you possible? See, we live in such an individualistic society that we think that we alone make ourselves possible. And while I do think that our labor, our effort, etc., is certainly building possibilities for ourselves, or at least the attempt of possibility, there are so many other people that are involved in who and what we are and what we do. Like, let's start with something as protein and organic as personality. In what soil did your personality grow? And in what environment does it continue to grow? So think of the relationships you had early in your life, as far back as you can remember. Relationships with little kids, neighbors, friends, cousins, siblings, your parents, when you got to kindergarten. How is it that your current personality is an outgrowth of the soil of that environment? Like, sometimes it can be something like, where did your pet peeves originate? I have two pet peeves, for example. One is people chewing loudly, eating loudly, and running late. So the other day, for example, I was sitting next to a dear friend, and he tends to chew with his mouth open, and he eats very enthusiastically. And the first few years of our friendship, it would just grate and grate on me. I would have tried to avoid sitting around him when we would be eating together. But unfortunately, what little spare time he and I had to hang out was often around mealtime, so risked straining our friendship. So as I'm sitting next to him, and I'm wondering who makes me possible, who made this pet peeve possible, where does it come from? I remembered a few vivid images from childhood. One of my older siblings experiences misophonia. That's the stress and tension, arousal due to sounds in her environment. And it can be from a variety of different things. Like, her hearing is so sensitive. I can remember I was 15 and I had my Sony Walkman and I was listening to Metallica's Justice for All album. It had just come out. And I had the headphones on, and then I had a pillow over my head because, I'm sharing a room with siblings. And I was startled. It was late at night, and I was startled when this older sister came and gently lifted the pillow from my face and said, "Would you please turn that down? I can hear you from upstairs and across the house." And so I held up my Walkman in the dark, kind of showed her that the next setting lower than the setting I had it on was 0. I had it on 1, volume 1 all the way to 10. I had it on volume 1. And so I click it to 0 and it turns off. And she gets this look of relief on her face, just like the tension drains out of her. She pats me on the shoulder and she says, "Okay, thank you. Now I can sleep." And she goes upstairs and, as far as I know, went to sleep. And so I was laying there in the dark and I knew her hearing was sensitive, but she was upstairs across the house. And the very faint sound of my headphones from downstairs on the other side of the house was enough to keep her awake. Well, imagine how she responded if I was chewing with my mouth open as a small child. This older sibling is, a few years older than me. And so it would be a very sharp response, right? And then she would complain to my parents, and I'd be redirected from my parents. "You need to chew with your mouth closed." And so now there's this association in my psyche between the sound of chewing and stress and sharp redirection, sharp tension. And so, so when I'm sitting next to my friend, he's chewing with his mouth open, that sound is now associated with stress and tension. And so it would be understandable that I'd be a little stress and tense when he's chewing with his mouth open. Now, this is a me problem, not a him problem. And so therefore I'm like, okay, do I choose to ask him to eat a little bit quieter? What do I do now that I've gotten in touch with where this pet peeve comes from and what it means? And it turns out it's not about me. It's about the sensitivities of an older sibling, ultimately. Likewise, running late. It's a pet peeve of my father as well, and so I have vivid memories from early childhood of us running late and my father being very tense and very angry about that. And so I inherited that habit, that tension around anger. So these are some negative examples. Let's talk about, well, seemingly negative examples. Let's talk about some positive examples. I love books. Where does that come from? Well, when we had a TV in the house, and my memory is years at a time, we didn't have necessarily an operational TV. And when the TV was there and operational, we often weren't allowed to use it except under very controlled circumstances. We spent more time in the library growing up. So as compensation for our poverty and inability to afford certain things, as well as rules around television exposure, I found myself in libraries with books. And so to this day, I have a love of reading. And so many of my siblings do too. It's just part of the family culture is less TV, more books. And so how many of us ended up with doctorate degrees? Let's see, I'm in the middle of 7 children, 1 advanced degrees, college degrees. Yeah, I think all of us but one ended up with a college degree and several advanced degrees. Wow. So it makes sense that because we were raised in and around books, in and around libraries, that is a part of my personality today, right? Likewise, I tend to be pretty loving and pretty easygoing. And so where does that come from? Well, there was a lot of contention amongst my 3 older siblings. And so I would often be doing my own thing, not wanting to participate in the contention as a small child, like 4 and 5 years old. And my mother, to get a break, would come and just sit quietly with me. And so that just perpetuated through the years. My mother was, I don't know that she was intending to reinforce that particular characteristic, but she did. She was very pleasant company. I was very pleasant company. And so therefore that tendency to be very other-oriented was reinforced at a young age. Now, who makes you possible? Like, start looking at some of your personality characteristics. In what environment did they grow? Okay. So if you're shy, where did that come from? If you're a little more extroverted, where did that come from? If you're ambiverted, meaning that you're shy in some contexts and a little more outgoing in other contexts, who endeavors and facilitates your shyness with you, and who endeavors and facilitates your outgoingness with you, even though they're not intending necessarily to do that? Are you comfortable around friends, and therefore in the bosom of their safety, you can be more enthusiastically and outwardly participating in that relationship? And with whom are you a little more quiet and reserved? And what's going on in that relationship? How are they making your outward expressions possible, and how are they making your silence possible? Okay? Who makes you possible? So I'd also like to kind of reflect with you on who makes you possible. You're probably listening to my voice on a phone, a tablet, or a computer. Where did the phone come from? Where did the funds to purchase the phone come from? Where did the materials to build the phone come from? Who engineered and manufactured the phone? Just us having this particular relationship digitally, there are, I don't know how many people involved in the creation of the technology, the perpetuation of this technology to make this kind of conversation possible. Right? This video, for example, is made possible in part by my daughter Diamelin, who is very kind enough to edit these videos for me because she knows I'm something of a Luddite in some ways. I'm not very gifted with technology. And so therefore, she makes this video possible behind the scenes. Again, all the friends, family, clients, colleagues that I've had through the years, all the people that I've related to, all these stories that we all participate in, all of these people have made this series possible. Right? It's from the technology we have and who participates in that technology, who provided it, right? Who built it, who engineered it, who provided it. Reflect on that. For example, if you're listening to me and a spouse or a family member or a friend is helping pay your phone bill, they're making this possible for us. Likewise, think of the success you've known in life. So I have several degrees. And yes, I earned them, right? Our good old Western individualistic perspective, I earned these degrees. And on the one hand, that is true. On the other hand, that is also incomplete. One day, for example, when I was a doctoral student and I was working full-time, even though that was against graduate school policy, I had a young family, I had 2 little babies, so I'm working full-time and I'm going to school full-time, and I was so sleep-deprived regularly. And I remember taking a break, and I was talking to two of my colleagues in the program, and they asked me how my babies were, and I told them, and they just reflected with me. They said, "We don't understand how you can do it. How could you possibly be a husband and father and in graduate school at the same time?" And their concern was earnest and well placed in some ways. And as I reflected back on this, I went, "Man, how is this possible?" And then I thought of the way in which my sweetheart was compensating for my busyness. That meals would magically appear, laundry would magically be done. There were a couple of years I think I cooked maybe twice in 2 years, whereas it used to be a 50-50 thing. I think I did laundry 0 times in 2 years during graduate school. That my sweetheart very intentionally compensated for that. There would be times when I'd get stuck on a particular thorny intellectual problem in my research, and the kids would be fussy, and so we would get in the car and drive, and we would conquer two things. One, the kids could get a nap if the car was running, and the other thing is I could share with her and kind of talk out loud and work out loud through these particular issues in my research and my writing with her. And she was a lovely sounding board. If I had not met her, if we had not formed a relationship, if we did not form intentionally the kind of relationship that we have, I don't know that I would have gone to graduate school. In fact, one of my favorite jobs was working at a gas station convenience store. I worked for a woman named Jackie. She was the best manager I've ever had, just amazing with people, wonderful leader, very competent person. And I think if I didn't know somebody and love somebody the caliber of my wife, I'd probably still be working in convenience stores. Go work my 8 hours, go home to my little rusty trailer out in the desert, and read some books, play some Xbox, live a very simple, very contented life. And not to imply that my sweetheart in any way ever asked or demanded that I go to college or graduate school, etc. Instead, she just provided the kind of environment where those things became desirable, and the way in which she would help set up my world such that they were possible. And I'd like to think I did the same thing for her with her graduate degrees as well at a later date. And so she made my success possible. And so that hit me so deeply in graduate school that when I was awarded my diploma with my doctorate degree, they do what's called a hooding, where they put this special thing, like sash around your neck, and they hand you the diploma case, and it's empty, by the way, when they hand it to you. It's mailed to you later. But I walked off the stage with that diploma case, and I handed it to my sweetheart, and I said, "Thank you, Dr. Draper. You earned it." Because she made it all possible, right? Don't get me wrong, there were others besides. My dear mother-in-law, she was so supportive. There were a couple times we hit financial roadblocks, and just enough money would seemingly magically appear to get us over that, where the last few dollars of rent got paid, or that particular grocery bill got paid off. Things like that. Just these little things. Some of my colleagues in some of my classes who pulled a little extra weight on a group project. Supervisors who were flexible with me in my clinical placements around scheduling. Right? Likewise, today, this video is made possible by people who've encouraged me to do this. Right? The clinical work are people who believe in me enough that they give me space to do clinical work in their environment and encourage me to do so. My students at the universities, they make university right now. They make me possible, right? There are some classes that are amazing because the students come in and participate. We have great conversations, really deep, meaningful ones. And others, the conversations aren't there because we're not making one another possible in the same way as in other classes. And so, who makes you possible? What personality characteristics you have? What successes that you know? Who makes you possible? There's a myth that troubles me, and that is the myth of deserving. I deserve. And relative to that myth is the self-made person. I don't want to denigrate all the sleepless nights I had going to school, working full-time, going to school full-time, right? Tenure at 2 different institutions, the publish or perish while doing clinical work, while teaching, heavy teaching load. Yes, I did all of those things. And yet I'm not self-made. I remember at one university, two universities, the admins were extremely important. The people sitting at the front desk for the departments were so incredibly and extraordinarily helpful. And without them, I don't know that I could have succeeded as much in academia as I did. So think of the web of people that makes your success possible. And I would encourage you to not infrequently express gratitude to them. Like a dear friend of the family, Dave Stone, he has since passed on, bless his soul. He was a very successful businessman, a speculative investor, like what my kids would call a Shark Tank investor today. And one day, after he had had a conversation with my father, he would come to my father for theological perspectives and counsel. And after he talked to my father one day, he just sat there and he looked across the table at me, and I was tall and muscular, and he was short and squat. He looks across the table at me very intensely, had these very intense blue eyes, and he says, "I'm going to give you some advice." And I was sitting there startled because I'd just been eavesdropping on their conversation. And he said, "Always treat the people who believe they have no power in your line of work with kindness and respect." He says, "You will know such great success." But he says, don't do it because it makes you successful. Do it because kindness is a worthy end in and of itself. He said, but you'll be surprised how much more successful you'll be if you're kind to those who believe they have no power, your secretaries, your department admins, people like that, the person who empties the garbage for your office, right? He says, always be kind to the people who believe they have less power. He says, on the one hand, it's worthy in and of itself. On the other hand, they often have far more power than they know. Secretaries, department admins, etc., often know where all of the little pockets of money are, where all the bodies are buried, what's going on behind the scenes. Like a supervisor comes in and yells at you, and you have no idea it came out of the blue. Somebody in the office probably knows the context of what's going on, and it's disproportionately the people who are in touch with every branch in every office, and that's usually the admins. So be very kind to your admins, right? Dave was authentically. He made sure that whoever he worked with, that he looked out for them and had their best interest in heart, and that they knew it. It's one of the reasons he was so successful. The other thing I would encourage you to is cross the aisle. That everywhere I go, there are important boundaries around professor-student, right? Presenter-audience, therapist-client, father-child, right? Or in my case, child to my father. And there are important nurturing and healthy moral ethical boundaries in each of those cases. And sometimes those prohibit or inhibit certain forms of contact. So for my clients, I tend to remain outside of their personal lives and therefore maintain a professional relationship with them. When I'm working with interns, though, again, maintaining very healthy and respectful boundaries, and at the same time, though, making sure the interns feel included. Hey, we therapists are going to go do that. Why don't you interns come join us, right? Include them on the team of therapists, because they're often therapy interns, right? When I am in an office and wanting to go eat some lunch, the students are welcome to sit in my office and join me as I eat lunch. And we'll chit-chat about life, give them advice about how to write this or that paper. And so I've noticed that there are those who are willing to cross the aisle, like a group of lawyers working with a group of paralegals. It's natural that we click up with those that we share most interest with, right? Lawyers with lawyers, paralegals with paralegals, executives with executives, frontline employees with frontline employees. And there are ways to very ethically and morally say, hey, I'm going to include you in my space. So we lawyers I'm not a lawyer, but hey, the lawyers are going to lunch, and some of them would invite some of the paralegals, or all of them, and say, whoever can make it, you're welcome to join us. That as we do this, it helps break down many of the barriers that are often born not by intent, but by habit. That old adage, birds of a feather flock together. So therefore, faculty hang out with faculty, and students hang out with students, and, admins hang out with admins, and executives hang out with executives. And one of the things that we can do is be the ones that are inclusive, right? So a colleague of mine challenged me the other day, and he said, but Matt, what happens if I have a close relationship with a supervisee and I need to redirect them? And I said, well, one of the things that you may want to do with those, if there's a power difference, is be very clear that you care about them enough to give them fair and honest feedback. Okay, a draperism for this that I use in some of the rough and tumble places I've worked clinically, like prisons and addictions clinics, etc. As I said, I love you enough to kick your ass, right? And that's shorthand for I care about you enough to give you very direct and honest feedback because I care about you. And I'm going to do what I can to maintain the kind of relationship with you such that when I give you feedback, that you know it's coming from a place of love and that my feedback is important. Okay? So you can still cross the aisle in some cases, not in all cases, but in some cases, and you can include people, and that can be examples of clear boundaries. For example, some years ago, a dear friend of mine needed a particular course to graduate, and I was the one teaching that class. And so he comes to me and he says, "Hey, I'm going to take this particular class from you." And I leaned forward and looked at him and said, "Okay, I'm going to expect a lot from you because I know exactly how bright you are." And so I went and told the department chair, "Hey, this friend of mine's taking this class from me. I'm the only person who can teach it. I'll keep you appraised if there's attempts at boundary crossing." And so, sure enough, as the semester went on, he wanted little exceptions, right? He wanted, "Oh, I had the thing come up with my kid's football game. I can't hand in my paper on time." And I said, "Like, policy is in the syllabus." Right? Ooh, one day he came into my office frustrated because he'd lost a bunch of points on a paper because he handed it in late and I was following the policy in the syllabus. And so I looked at him and said, "I love you enough to hold you to the standards we agreed on when we started. And so I'm still your friend and I still care about you, but because you're my friend, I'm going to hold you to a standard I know you can live up to." And don't get me wrong, it took a while for the happy ending there to unfold because he was mad at me for weeks. He did not earn the grade in the class that he thought that he should get. And I reminded him, I don't give grades, you earn them, right? All we have to do is look at how you've done on these quizzes. We add up the points on these papers. We add up the points. And right there at the end, that's your grade. I don't give grades, you earn them, right? So yes, that was many years ago and we're still very good friends to this day. Care about people enough to be known as the one that will give fair and honest feedback. So that's a way where you can morally and ethically cross the aisle in your place of employment. Again, if you're a physician, if you're a therapist, that's a little more complicated, right? We need to practice the ethic of outsideness and avoid dual roles. In other settings, we can still maintain our role and not engage in dual roles. Like, I can be friendly with a student and still be their professor, not their friend. I'm a friendly professor, right? My colleagues at work, I'm still their colleague. I'm a friendly colleague, and I'm still a colleague. Right? There are ways to do this. And if you have any questions, ask in the comments. If you'd like another video and follow up, hey, Matt, here's a scenario. How, if you're living the philosophy of acknowledging who makes you possible, here's a situation at work. What are some ideas on maybe things we could do about that, right? And I'll be happy to either post another video or Diana and I will respond to the comment. So, who makes you possible? From your personality to your interests to your successes, who makes you possible? Right now, whoever is making you possible, as a spouse, as a parent, as a child, reach out to those people. If you're in a place of employment, who makes you possible? Who makes your job possible? Right? Your employer, your colleagues, those who report to you, those that you interact with. And I would encourage you to endeavor some humility and gratitude with that. Right? There's so many people who make you possible. Both your noble characteristics as maybe even your ignoble characteristics. So express gratitude and endeavor to continue to associate with those who make the best of you possible. So thank you for joining me on yet another episode of Living in Uncertain Times with Old Dr.